Hello, Euro nerds. By popular demand, I decided to make a recording of this how to analyze documents in AP Euro DBQs, especially for those who may have missed instruction because of a whole bunch of reasons. So I'll try and make this as concise as possible. So first things first, this is just a guide on how we analyze documents in the DBQ. It is not a how to write a DBQ podcast. This is just on how we analyze documents using something we call CAP POV. Other APO programs may call it POV Plus or Hippo, but we're going to use CAP POV because that's what I've always used. So it's just for the documents. This is not a full scale how to write a DBQ by any means. So here we go. So first and foremost, in the document-based question essay, one aspect is going to involve what we call sourcing the documents, explaining how these other issues may impact the way it was written or the meaning of the document or something of that nature. So in the AP Euro DBQs, there are 7 documents every single time. You need to analyze the source, what we'll call basically CAP POV, correctly 3 times in order to score 1 point out of 7 on the rubric. So full disclosure, it's actually a lot of work to get 1 point out of 7 on the rubric, but regardless, I actually do think it's a pretty cool skill to learn and get good at. And additionally, what you'll learn here is going to be used again in APUSH next year. All of the writing skills are identical in AP Euro as they are in APUSH. Okay. So I basically go through each part of how we analyze these documents and give you an explanation of what it means and additionally good and bad examples. So it's going to take time. You need to be patient with yourself. It is very rare that students are going to knock this one out of the park first time around. So be patient with yourself and you'll be good to go. Okay. So let's read through this. So what does it mean to analyze a document? The goal of a document analysis is to provide some insight into the factors that shape the way historical documents are created. This is your chance to show that rather than simply accepting all information provided to you as fact, you are a critical thinker who understands that these documents were created by real human beings and all of the complexity involved with that. The key to scoring well on these is that you do not simply identify a factor affecting a document, but you offer an explanation for how the document is affected. You do need to identify, but you also got to tell me why it matters, the how. That's always kind of the case in AP Euro. So, for us, you need to memorize the following acronym, CAP POV, CAP POV, and it means context, audience, purpose, and point of view, also known as POV. All right, so let's start with context. Context means you are providing relevant historical background information not found in the document that helps explain why the document was written or why it says what it does. Overall, think big picture and its themes, how the themes impact the document. This is where knowing dates actually comes in handy. Note, contextualizing the document needs to be separate from contextualizing the entire essay. So in the actual DBQ, you do need to contextualize the entire prompt, just like you do with the LEQ, but you can actually contextualize the document as a form of sourcing, but they are considered separate. And as always, we cannot double dip in AP Euro. All right, so let's look at some bad examples. So first, I show you an example with the Peasant Wedding, the Peasant Wedding by Bruegel. So let's look at that quick to remind yourself. All right. Thank you, Google Arts and Culture, for being awesome as usual. So, this is a typical Northern Renaissance painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder. We know that in Northern Renaissance, art often showed elements of everyday life. What are regular people doing in this time period? And Bruegel was particularly well known for showing that. And here we have quite literally a wedding for peasants. So you don't see extravagance. You see like typically what a wedding would look like for your average peasant. We got whatever is going on here with some orangey soup, I'm assuming. I don't know, I'm gonna go with soup. It's guy's pouring down some beer, giving it to a little kid. Great idea. Makes sense, though, when your water will probably kill you. So there's our context here. Well, our idea. So let me show you a poor example of an attempt at context. So Peter Bruegel's The Peasant Wedding focuses on the daily life of average people. Is this true? Yes, it is. You do need to state, you do have to kind of describe the painting in this case, or describe whatever the document is, but that is not enough. So here's the student's attempt at, this actually is kind of closer to POV, to be completely honest, but it still doesn't work. So this says, this makes sense because he was Dutch. So please never write a sentence like that. It is just bad writing. It is not an attempt at analysis. It is a waste of time. Never write anything remotely like this. Don't say, this makes sense because he was a king. This makes sense because she was a woman. None of that. Don't do it. What are we looking for? This is a correct example of context. Bruegel's focus on the daily life in the peasant wedding is a part of the Northern Renaissance tradition. Far from the wealthy patrons of Italy and the influence of the church, Northern artists were more free to focus on the typical experiences of average people. So I'm looking at this. This is a 2-sentence response. On average, you can nail cat POV in about 2 sentences. You can maybe do 1 sentence if it's just really good. Probably could be a run-on sentence, honestly. 2 sentences is kind of a sweet spot. 3 sentences, sure, why not? But again, our DBQ is timed. You only have an hour to read the documents and write it. So I don't think you're going to have much time to consistently write 3 sentences or more for cat POV. So I would say the sweet spot's 2 sentences. So again, here we identify the issue, we identify the thing, which is Northern Renaissance is the larger context, and then explain how this is part of that wider context. All right, let's go to another example with Machiavelli. Bad example. Machiavelli's The Prince provides instructive examples on how a ruler should maintain power. Is that true? Yes. But this is just a description, a summary of The Prince. It does not go into the source. It definitely does not go into the context of the time. Better example here. Machiavelli's The Prince provides instructive examples on how a ruler should maintain power because in the early 16th century, the Italian peninsula was separated into over a dozen independent regions and city-states, which led to instability, which Machiavelli wanted to address or fix. That is your historical context. It talks about the political makeup of the Italian peninsula. It also talks a little bit about the geography as well. That's what we're looking for. Okay. Last example for context. We'll talk about Henry VIII. So King Henry VIII nationalized all Catholic Church lands and then sold the majority of it to English nobles to make money. Is that true? Absolutely is. Does that work? No. So this student has only, by student I mean me, has only identified or summarized the issue. It is not talking about the why or anything of that nature. This is a much better response. Prior to King Henry's famous dissolution of the monasteries, where he nationalized and sold church land, the king's treasury was depleted as a result of fighting many wars against the French, Scottish, and Irish. Additionally, unlike his father, Henry VIII was not frugal and spent the state's money on lavish castles. So here would have absolutely done the trick. Again, that is 1 sentence in this case, although it is a fairly complex sentence. I was also like, maybe it's kind of on the line. I just wanted to cover my butt. So I did add in an additional piece of context. This could very potentially have also been a standalone attempt at context, and it probably would have gathered the point there. So there you go with good and bad examples of context. Let's go to the next part, audience. Audience is all about recognizing that the intended audience of a piece has an effect on what is said. Example, if one of your parents asks you, how was your day? How was school? Do you give them the same response when your friend asks? Probably not. Your parents ask you, all right, how was school? You give them the typical response, it was good. But then your friend asks you the same response, and you're like, oh my God, I had a test, I bombed it. Because why? You're more likely to be open with your friend because they're not going to be as judgmental as, say, your parents who might yell at you for possibly failing a test. So another example, imagine it's pre-COVID, or how about this, we'll go after COVID, go into a wild party on a Friday night, you come back at 3 a.m, parents next day ask you, hey, Johnny, how was that party? And you're like, it was good. And then your friend texts you later that day, hey, Johnny, how was that party? You're like, dude, it was amazing. You know, we did some things, hooked up with some people. It's fantastic. See, very different response because your audience is different and you're more likely to be more open with your friend. All right, so let's actually make a historical example here involving Luther. So, full disclosure, when audience and purpose, I often kind of mix the two. To me, it's really tough to talk about audience without talking about purpose and vice versa. And that's okay. It actually, you can do that. It doesn't matter if you think you're analyzing for audience and you automatically analyze for purpose. It doesn't matter. You will still get the correct point. The reader will sort that out. That's okay. But regardless, here's a poor example involving Luther. Martin Luther was a Catholic monk, wrote the 95 Theses in Latin. From this, we can tell that his intended audience was the educated elite. This is true, but it is simply summarizing what happened. It is not offering an explanation on why this matters. Here's what you need to do. Luther was a Catholic monk, wrote the 95 Theses in Latin because his intended audience was other members of clergy. The knowledge that his ideas would not spread beyond an elite few may have allowed Luther to be more free with his criticism than he would have been if he thought the average peasant would learn about it. See, that's offering an explanation on why the document's message could be changed depending on the audience. All right, let's look at purpose. As with audience, the focus here is on the intent of the author. Another word I like to use for purpose is motive. What does the author want his audience to think? What does he want them to do? It's very common that audience and purpose are combined, and that's okay. Talking about one almost always leads to a discussion of the other. Remember, you can't just identify the purpose. You have to explain how it affects what the author says. All right, let's do a little bit of a Euro/A-push example here with Paul Revere. So Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre shows innocent civilians being shot by British soldiers in cold blood. He made this to show everyone in the colonies what was happening. All right, so let me Google this for you. Paul Revere, Boston Massacre. Okay. Here we are. I'll use this one. So just remind yourself, Boston Massacre. British soldiers were fired upon. Sorry, they fired upon colonists. They killed, I think it was 5 or 6 people. And yes, there was a dog present. I believe the dog was fine. Don't worry. So, anyways, Revere engraves this. So, what was his motive? What was his purpose for doing this? So this person, this person says, it's just to show everyone in the colonies what was happening. Okay, yeah, probably, but that's like very surface level. That's not really analysis. This is what you got to do. Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre deliberately exaggerated the violence involved and the nature of the conflict in Boston, and here's the key part, in order to stir popular anger against the British. That's the kicker right there. That's his true motive, is to make more and more people angry at British colonization because it would inevitably lead to independence. All right, let's look at Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon Crossing the Alps. I spelled that wrong, whatever. So, just in case you don't remember what this painting was about, it's a neoclassical painting by the court painter to Napoleon, who also, fun fact, was a member of the Jacobins during the revolution itself. So again, his whole idea is to make Napoleon look heroic, blah, blah, blah. We get it. So, bad example first. In David's portrait of Napoleon, Crossing the Alps, David portrays Napoleon as physically larger than life. Is that true? Yes. Does it tell me why it matters? No. Better example. In David's portrait of Napoleon, Crossing the Alps, David portrays Napoleon as physically larger in order to show the strength of the new emperor, which would inspire more people to follow him. That's the key. That's what we want to hear. All right. Last one, point of view. Oh, one side note. So I graded the AP Euro DBQs last year, and I probably graded like 600 of these things. What I found as a reader was that the students who used audience and purpose as their most common form of CAP POV generally did not do well. So I think that is from a number of reasons, but I believe it's because students might think audience and purpose are the easiest, but I think that's not exactly the case. It's usually those students only identify, they only like summarize the document. They don't really get into the why, the how, the really what matters. So personally, I prefer context, and I'm about to explain point of view. So what you'll find is you might pick a favorite one that you're particularly good at, and that's fine. You can literally analyze for context for all 7 documents. Doesn't matter. So just find the ones that you're really good at and probably stick with them. And additionally, some documents might lend themselves to a certain part of CAT POV better than other. So let's get to the last one, point of view. Point of view focuses on what you know about the author and how that information helps you interpret what the author says. You can usually get everything you need from the short description of the author that is included with a document. Typical analytical categories include the profession of the person, nationality, social class, race, gender, religion. Once again, it is not enough to identify the author. You have to explain how the author's point of view affects what they say. So let's go back to the French Revolution with Olympe de Gouges. Bad example. The Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen by Olympe de Gouges was a direct response to and criticism of the exclusion of women from the rights enjoyed by men in France. It makes sense that de Gouges felt this way because she was a woman. Once again, please never write that, ever. It's horrible. Don't do it. So the first part, that does summarize the document, but it is not sourcing it. It is not telling me why this person's perspective matters. Here's a correct example. De Gouges, a French philosophe that initially supported the revolution, wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen to criticize the exclusion of women from civic life. True, it still would not be enough. De Gouges' disillusionment with the male-dominated revolution was a result of her own exclusion from politics on account of her gender, which led to her outspoken position. That is the key right there, that last section. Personally felt the exclusion and is advocating for change. All right. So, again, this is going to take practice, and you need to be patient with yourself. Mr. Walters and myself, we're going to probably give you additional suggestions on what you need to do when you're writing about CAT POV actually in your essay, but that's going to be for another time. So thanks for listening. Have a good one.